There was a rumor that circulated through the town of Old Cherries, a whisper that no one dared to speak aloud. They said that on the farthest hill, behind dead trees and forgotten paths, there was a house that did not belong to time, a house where clocks followed no logic, where every second could be a deadly trap. No one in the town dared to go near it, except for the most reckless, and me, driven by a curiosity that would soon turn into something I would wish I had never felt. The first time I saw it, the house seemed to be watching me. The windows were opaque, covered in dust and cobwebs, and the shadows of dead vines twisted across the facade like fingers ready to grab me. The wind blew irregularly, as if afraid to get too close, and the air smelled of dampness and rusty metal. Every step I took along the path to the front door seemed to echo in a space that didn't entirely exist. It was as if the ground, the walls, even the air, were out of sync with the outside world. When I opened the door, the creak was deafening, like an ancient scream that had been waiting to be released. The entrance was covered in clocks, some large, some small, all hung irregularly. Their hands spun at different speeds. Some moved backward, others so fast it was impossible to read the time, and a couple remained completely still, as if time had stopped forever at those points. The sensation was disconcerting, as if each clock represented a different universe, and I was the intruder in each of them. I decided to move forward, although every step made me feel weaker, as if the air itself was draining my energy. The stairs creaked under my weight, and with every sound, it seemed the house was reacting, adjusting its dimensions, stretching the hallways, and twisting corners impossibly. When I reached the main hall, a huge clock dominated the room. Its hands spun erratically, accelerating and retreating with no pattern. As I approached, I felt pressure in my chest, as if each tick had physical weight. It was then that I saw it for the first time. A tall, undefined shadow floated in front of the clock. It had no face, just a human shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. I felt a deep cold, a shiver that ran down my spine. I tried to step back, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. Every movement I made brought me closer to the clock and that figure that seemed to feed on time itself. A whisper began to surround me, a voice that came from nowhere, saying impossible things. My own memories, mixed with futures that had never existed moments of my life I didn't remember yet, were there fresh, as if time inside the house had its own memory. The room began to tremble slightly. The walls rippled, the clocks spun faster, and the ticking multiplied, resonating in my ears until it became a deafening hum. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the chaos, trapped in a place where time fragmented. Each clock showed my face in different states. Younger, older, sick, dead. I felt as if the house was showing me the fate that awaited me if I stayed there, as if every second that passed dragged me toward a version of myself I could no longer control. I tried to run toward the exit, but the door seemed to move away. The hallways twisted, and the ceiling stretched upward, creating a sensation of absolute vertigo. Every clock I looked at showed something different, and in each image, I saw trapped versions of myself, crying, trying to escape in vain. I began to realize that it wasn't just a house with broken clocks. It was a place where time had become a conscious entity, a silent predator, playing with my fears, my memories, and my very life. The air grew denser, and the sounds multiplied. The ticking of the clocks mixed with footsteps that weren't mine, with whispers that knew my name and my darkest secrets. Every second stretched until it hurt, and I felt on the verge of losing all sense of myself. The shadow in front of the clock began to move slowly, advancing toward me, while the clock spun with a violence that seemed to want to rip time from my veins. There was no way to escape, no light, no clear path. The house became a labyrinth that constantly changed, and I was just a pawn, trapped in its game. Every wall, every clock, every shadow seemed to watch me, mocking my fear, feeding on it, until I realized that what I was experiencing was not simply fear. It was an anticipation of something far worse, a terror without end that began to infiltrate every fiber of my being. Days after that experience in the House of Clocks, I tried to return to normal, although I knew something inside me had changed. My nights were filled with strange nightmares, clocks spinning in impossible directions, hallways stretching beyond the real, and shadows watching from places where nothing should be. But the worst part was not the dreams, but the memories I could no longer ignore. Memories that insisted on mixing with the present and threatening to drag me back to that cursed house. Then the package arrived. No sender, no clue as to its origin. Inside was an ancient mirror, large, with a dark wooden frame carved with symbols that seemed to move if you stared at them too long. The surface reflected the room, but there was something unnatural about it. The note that accompanied it read, "Look at what will be, not what was." At first, I thought it was a macabre joke, but a part of me, the same part that had opened the house of clocks, felt a shiver crawl down my spine. That night, I placed the mirror in front of my bed. At first, everything seemed normal, only my usual reflection. But then I noticed a slight delay in its movements, a minimal lag that made my reflection blink a moment after I did. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, until the reflection began to move independently. My gestures were slowly mimicked, but there were moments when my reflection did things I did not. It turned its head to look behind me, smiled while I remained still, seeming to observe something that did not exist in the room. Soon, the images inside the mirror began to change. It no longer showed just my reflection, but scenes that seemed like possible futures. Me walking through streets I did not recognize, accidents that had not yet happened, familiar faces dying before my eyes without my being able to do anything. Each night I looked, the visions became more intense, more vivid, and the sensation that something was watching me from the glass became unbearable. Sometimes I felt heat behind my neck, as if someone were very close, breathing just behind me, even though there was no one there. I tried to break the mirror, but the glass would not yield. Every strike only created ripples across the surface, distorting the images further. Any cracks that appeared vanished within seconds, and the visions seemed to mock my helplessness. I realized I could not look away. Even closing my eyes was not enough. In my dreams, the mirror scenes continued, intertwining with memories of the House of Clogs, with hallways stretching endlessly, and shadows whispering my name. Every time I woke up, I felt I had lost hours, minutes, or even days, unsure whether it had been real or just an illusion. The most terrifying moment came one dawn. I saw in the mirror a version of myself that no longer existed. A withered, pale body with empty eyes, desperately trying to escape the glass. I then understood something that chilled me to the bone. The mirror was not only showing possible futures, it was trying to replace me, to bring that version of myself into the real world. Every tick of the clock, every blink of the mirror, every second that passed seemed to bring that figure closer to my reality. The feeling of inevitability was absolute. Any attempt to escape only accelerated the events shown. As the days passed, the real world began to reflect what I saw in the mirror. Objects moved on their own. My friends and family acted strangely. And sometimes I felt someone speaking from beyond the glass, as if another consciousness were trying to communicate with me. Every sound, every shadow, every flickering light became a sign that time and reality itself were collapsing around me. I felt trapped in a loop where past, present, and future blended, and where every second could mean the loss of something irreparable. Even the quietest night became an endless nightmare. Looking into the mirror, I saw versions of myself in impossible situations, crying, screaming, running, trapped in rooms that looked far too much like the House of Clocks. The sense that something was on the other side, waiting, watching, became unbearable. Every blink of the mirror reminded me that time was no longer mine, that my life was being manipulated by an invisible, conscious force that delighted in my despair. Reality began to blur, and each night I wondered whether I would wake in my bed or inside one of the scenes the mirror showed. The line between what was and what could be vanished completely. Everything was consumed by fear, uncertainty, and the feeling that something was closer than I could endure. There was no way to escape, no way to close my eyes or flee from the time that had already decided to trap me in its grasp. I never returned to being the same. I tried to get rid of the mirror berry. It even smashed it in 1,000 ways, but it always appeared intact, watching me from some corner, showing me impossible futures and versions of myself I could no longer recognize. The clocks were no longer simple objects. Every tick I heard outside the house reminded me that time was no longer mine. Every second that passed was a small betrayal, a reminder that my life could be stolen, manipulated, and replaced by that other version that inhabited the glass.